Welcome to Scaling Without Breaking podcast, the show for startup leaders who are done winging it and sick of everything being a bottleneck. Your team's growing, the cracks are showing, and what got you here is officially breaking. Each week, you'll hear raw stories, sharp strategies, and real talk from founders, operators, and advisors who've scaled through chaos and built companies that run without constant firefighting. If you're ready to start leading like a CEO and move beyond just surviving, you're in the right place. Here is your host, Roland Siebelink.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Scaling Without Breaking. Today we have a different episode than usual. My producer Nick is going to ask me all the questions, even though normally I would be the one asking all the questions. So Nick, go right ahead.
Thank you, Roland. I always play the guest instead of the guest host role on other people's shows. So this is like being a grandparent without having to deal with the child at the end of the day.
I wonder how you got into that luxury situation, Nick. I envy you.
Well, trust me, it didn't fall on my head. I had to work hard towards it. So, Roland, we're doing this episode. Really, usually you are the one, obviously, hosting your guests and then having great conversations. But really, people don't really know who you really are, and also why you're doing this podcast and what's it supposed to be about. So I want to dig into those things with you and then introduce both your podcast and also you to your audience. That's our purpose today. So with that, let's start by telling us, what is your podcast called and what's it about?
So the podcast is called Scaling Without Breaking, and it's really about that difficult stage between a startup that reaches its first product market fit and then how that turns it into product market dominance over the years, right? So it is about that mid stage of the startup that is hard to get through all by yourself, because for every founder that does that, this is something completely new in their lives. Usually they haven't even managed a company before. They just got to learn what it's like to be managing a small team. And now they hit some fire and suddenly they have to hire tens of people, multiple layers of people in the organization, sometimes people with more experience than they themselves have. And everything starts breaking. All the things that worked for them early on basically stop working for them now. So while it looks from the outside that the company is super successful, on the inside it feels like everything is breaking, everything is tearing apart. And what's worse, the founder themselves feels like they're losing control, have no idea what all that money that they're spending on is actually going to. They're not seeing the results that they expected. And so it's this difficult kind of the growing pains area of a startup that we really delve into.
Mm-hmm. You know, I totally identify with this because I've experienced it myself. You know, the number one most important thing that starts breaking is you.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Nick. That is so true. That's why all my hair is gone already, right? So,
well, you know, it's you start to lose health, you start to lose mindset, and so this podcast is going to be. I mean, that's why you call it Scaling Without Breaking, right? It's a very good name. It says it all. So, who is in your audience? Who would you say would benefit from this podcast the most?
yeah, so definitely all those people that are currently involved with a growing startup. So that would be founders themselves, but also co-founders, leaders that have been hired, or people that have grown with the company that were early employees and are now typically like middle managers or VPs at that startup. Right. Then there are also founders and employees of companies that are not quite at that growth stage yet, but that anticipate and aspire to be there soon. Right. So they think they'll be hitting product market fit anytime now. And then hopefully they'll be in that turmoil. They'll want to be prepared for what's coming next. And then, of course, there's all the people just interested in startups and supporting them. So first and foremost, investors, but also angels, advisors, consultants, and potential employees for future startups as well.
Yeah, I mean, this highlights another differentiator between working for a startup versus a mature company. Because I see a lot of employees, or I should say candidates, applying for positions, and they read the job description, says, "Oh, I've done this before, I can apply," but they don't really know what it's like to be working in a startup environment, right? And it's a whole different approach, and they can also benefit from this.
Not only that, Nick, but it's also strangely the employees and sometimes even the hiring managers in the startup who do not realize what a big difference it is. So the other day I was talking to a client in Singapore, and he said, I got this candidate through my headhunter. What do you think? And I took one look at the CV, and I said, I think you should fire the headhunter, because seriously, this company is about 150 employees. So yes, a well-grown startup, I would say, right? But the candidate that the headhunter had come up with was a candidate that had only worked in companies of $1 billion or more. So typically 10,000 employees or more. And so I said, like, that headhunter obviously has no idea that a head of that function in a large company is totally different job from doing that same thing at a startup, even at growing startups like yours.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, hiring probably is a whole different podcast on its own. And hiring for startups, it's a big, and happens to be one of my interest areas. So any one of those people tuning in to your show, what do you think would be the benefits of tuning in? What will they take away by spending half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour of conversation?
I think a lot of practical tips on how do you deal with all those growing pains in a startup at the moment that they arise. We also try to always take a generalist perspective. So not only focus on hiring, as you said, or not only focused on marketing, or not only focused on dealing with technical scaling issues, but really what's the big picture in between all those functions, right? So how do I wear my CEO hat, my founder hat, and look at the big picture of how do I drive this company forward? And so this is often kind of like management training in a box, if you will. It's the kind of stuff that people have not learned in school yet, or if they haven't had it in an MBA, let's say. It's about learning about all these different functions and how they fit together to create value for the customer together, and then to make that process more repeatable, more scalable, so that you actually can get to that product market dominance that would show the result of your startup as a big successful company.
Yeah. I mean, you're so right. I actually experienced a scenario exactly as you described only today. I have a co-founder, and he is in charge of growth. So I asked him to prepare a strategic plan for all the initiatives that he's planning to put in place. And I gave him, look, this is not numbers. This is just a simple list of all the initiatives answering the 5 W's. And let's first agree on that. Let's get aligned on what the initiatives are, what the objectives are. And then we're going to move on to how we're going to measure the success of those programs. And then we're going to move on to creating a model, not projections, a model. And then that will render the projections. So we're going to do this in stages. So meeting number 2, he's supposed to come with a strategic plan. And guess what? You've got an Excel sheet with 10, 15 lines with some numbers next to them showing me what he wants. So I said, this is not a strategic plan. I ask you, blah, blah. He says, well, I've never done something like this before. Okay. Well, that's the opportunity to do it. He says, yeah, but people usually hire me to bring sales. I said, look, sales, definitely. That's the objective. But we don't want sales to come out of something you have in your head. We want it to be exactly as you said, repeatable, with full transparency, so that anybody can execute that plan, but you oversee how it's progressing and your vision will drive it.
I'm so glad that you say that, if I may interrupt, because that is so much of the work we do to get the ideas out of the founder's head and onto paper, or be it a digital document these days, but basically get it out of their head and let other people execute on the plan as opposed to what they think at any point in time. Because I'll tell you, Nick, most of the founders we work with, they're still in that mode where they're the only brain in the company, and everyone is constantly coming to them like, what do you think I should do? What do you think I should do here? What do you think I should do there? And they're constantly giving guidance, but they never give the full plan, not even to themselves, right? And that makes it totally unscalable. It basically forces everyone to keep asking them all the time, well, what do you think? What do you think I should do? And I say, the last one who should be thinking in the company is actually the founder.
Right. Exactly.
Not in the sense that they shouldn't be, but literally the last to be thinking, because every other thing should have been given some thought by someone else already.
Yeah, it's I give this example of my native space is Amazon, as you know, and I follow their methodologies, and their staff meetings there is no presentations. PowerPoint is banned. They all sit down and eat. Read press release.
I know. It's amazing. I've used the methodology with many of the startup customers we work with as well. It's probably a little bit too thorough for them at that stage, understandably so, right? But as an inspiration, it's really really powerful.
Yeah, and also it lays it all out. There's no unknowns. It can be scrutinized. 10, 12 minds scrutinizing something better than just one person trying to come up with the answers. So my next question is, this is a great topic. This country is delivering entrepreneurs every day with a unique idea working out of their garages, but then taking it to the next level is a whole different ballgame. So that's where you come in with the podcast to become a resource. So give us a sense of who your guests will be on the show.
Mm-hmm. Guests are very often the founders, CEOs of companies that have recently attracted some new funding. Typically, they raised a Series A, sometimes a larger Series C or a smaller Series B, but they're basically already in the middle of that scaling game, right? So from moving from initial product market fit to the first steps towards product market dominance. I don't usually have guests on the show that are already at the later stage of that are close to product market dominance. I've had one or two, but most of them are at the beginning of that journey. Like, how are we building up a team? How do we expand just the core of me and the co-founder into more like a leadership team? How do we start dealing with multiple layers of people in our organization? How do we balance technical debt with the new features that our customers are demanding? All those challenges. And very often, the difficult thing is you raise funding, you think you're going to grow a lot faster, and yes, you should. Most people then expect that means I have to go into like 5, 6 different geographies and 7 product lines, and then maybe also add some distribution channels. And actually the paradox, Nick, is that in most cases, it actually requires more focus, not less focus. And that is a very difficult lesson for people to learn.
Yeah, I agree. And everything takes its own momentum to get going, and all the new initiatives. And if there is no structure to roll these things out and measure and then scale, then obviously you just playing poker, really, at the end of the day.
Blind poker almost, right? Like it's more like a game of chance. And you're right, the structure is so important. Nothing super bureaucratic, I don't think, but really simple things like a one-page strategic plan that we often help customers draw up, just again to get the thoughts out of the founder's head into some kind of structure so that everyone can see what the plan is. We're all playing on the same field. We all know what performance looks like, and now we can all work towards that goal together, right? And that makes such a huge difference in making a team more effective.
Yeah. So I've heard you mention the guests on the show are those founders who've raised Series A. Not everybody is lucky to raise money. However, they may have a good idea, and they may have a good sense to grow it to a certain point. So, are those also welcomed on the show? And if so, what is the qualifier? What would you and really this ties to not necessarily just for the show. The show just brings out the conversations, but how do you differentiate the startup that is still small but does not necessarily need to worry about so much, then just validate and while still generating revenue, versus those who are approaching that serious educated help for the next phase? So what is the cutoff?
I think the cutoff really is about the growth ambitions of the company and to what degree their whole strategic plan is about that, right? So in Silicon Valley, we differentiate a startup from a lifestyle business, and lifestyle business is meant a little bit derogatory. I don't think that's justified. I think a lifestyle business is a great business, just like everything else, but it basically means a business that is enough to fund one or two people's salaries, hopefully a little bit, enough in a little bit more so that they can enjoy some luxuries. But it's also not a business that is supposedly growing all that much. It's always profitable, or that's the goal at least, right? And that is a business that also typically closes when the founder retires, right? So that is a lifestyle business. The kind of businesses we typically work with, what we call a real startup, are those that say from the outset, the only purpose of our business is to grow really big. And so we target like 100, 200, 300% per year growth, right? The typical thing in Silicon Valley is triple, triple, double, double, double. So that is like huge growth, right? And in order to fund that growth, they need to get money from somewhere else, typically from angels and then from venture capitalists. So you say, like, if you're lucky enough to raise financing, it's also a matter of, well, it's necessary, or you've made the choice to raise financing at whatever cost to your personal life, right? And so it's really like a choice up front. And once you've made the choice, there's no going back, especially not once you've raised VC money. They will make sure that you stay the course and that you stay on the path, or at least that the company does, and maybe not with you.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So this is a very good question. So I had on my podcast, I had a venture capitalist, the owner, the actual owner of the small but nevertheless a venture capital firm, and he had made 25 investments. And I asked him, as an entrepreneur, you come up with an idea and then you start pursuing it, but you fail. And then you try again and fail. When is the right time for an entrepreneur to say, I quit? It's tried, it's not working. When is the right time? You know what he said? Entrepreneurs don't quit, they pivot.
That's a good answer, right?
So whatever the idea may be good, but the way you went about it may not be the right way. So you pivot to a different model, different revenue, different distribution, different. So in the process, maybe the whole proposition may pivot slightly, pivot audience, pivot whatever. So that I thought that fitted perfectly into what I always advocate, which is you never, if you believe in, I say, first of all, asking when to quit is never the right question. The question is, how much do you believe in what you are chasing for? If the answer is fully, then there is no quitting. You rob, you steal, you borrow, whatever it takes, you have to put in it. And in the process, you keep pivoting, pivot.
The pivoting aspect is very important in my experience, Nick, because we do have, well, first, the majority of people is just simply not stubborn enough to be an entrepreneur, right? So they would be much more pragmatic. And if you don't have that stubbornness, you cannot stick it out, right? But from those that are stubborn, the large majority are then too stubborn about their initial vision, and they don't want to move away from that. And that is also wrong, because the typical founder who is successful has a rare combination, really rare combination between being super stubborn about their vision, but super pragmatic about how it gets implemented, right? And that combination is so rare. And I think that explains why so many VCs only fund 1 out of 1,000 of pitches that come to them, because that's what they're looking for. That's the little nugget of gold in the mine, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, there's all kinds of things involved. There is ego, right?
We don't have any ego in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, well, ego is the biggest. So there's a saying: pride and arrogance are the devil's two animals. If you do not take control of them, they will take control of you.
Very much so, yes.
Yeah. So, all right, cool. So, I have a feeling also on your show, you're going to have different people with different expertise that also advise startups, right? Who are making that transition. So, tell us a little bit about those types of guests. What is your vision? What kind of guests you plan to have?
Yeah, so those could be people that offer advice in particular phases or particular functional areas in particular of a startup, right? So one day we will have like a marketing specialist who can talk through the customer adoption life cycle and how that changes in the course of the startup, all the way from innovators and early adopters to how do you actually then start breaching the mass market, right? There may be a finance specialist who comes in the changes of fundraising that happen over time. In the beginning, relatively small rounds where you do not give up majority control. Then you move to VCs, where the VCs actually start taking more control of your company with really aggressive growth targets. And then for those companies that ultimately reach a plateau, which ultimately every company does, you either may have exited already, good for you, or you may need to move into more private placements, private equity, where basically the company is then going through more efficiency organizations, right? Often roll-up games as well. So we would have finance people coming in. We could have technology specialists that talk about, well, do you need to do a replatforming over time when all your spaghetti code has become unmanageable and you need to basically reinvent the platform? Or is that the worst mistake you could possibly make in the life of a startup, right? The other functions that could come up are from a legal perspective, from an HR hiring perspective, but also about, how do you develop people? How do you make sure that everyone is an A player in the company? We have specialists in the sales field, of course, gigantic, right? To have sales specialists come in. And then, of course, product management people as well that can come in and say, like, how do you manage all of this? How do you say no to 95% of the requests in your company in order to identify those few nuggets that actually drive the company forward? And so those people are often ex-executives that have been at large startups before or smaller startups before, sometimes do some fractional work now, sometimes are looking for their next job themselves, or may have founded something by themselves as well.
Yeah, I mean, and they will be speaking from different perspectives, right? It's when you are buried in your own company's affairs, you're too close to the subject matter. And having somebody from the outside that has experienced different versions of what you're going through with an educated approach, that's a huge advantage. And yeah, I mean, you said it earlier, management in a box, like this is almost like that. This is great. So I want to switch gears a little bit and also introduce you to your audience. So tell us who Roland Siebelink is, where you grew up, and what I'm always interested to learn is, what you do today, you got good at it. But thinking back as a kid, can you remember the first thing that you did that resembles what you do today?
Very good questions. Okay, so my funny accent comes from the Netherlands. That's where I grew up originally, in a little village in the southwest called Wow. There's no lie. And then I stayed there until I was about 18 years old. I went to college in Belgium, so right across the border, different country right away. I've always been a nomad in my life. I'll come to my other 3 countries later on. I actually studied in Brussels. It was not that far from my parents' home, about 80 kilometers. But still different country, different culture. Learn a lot more French as well there. So that was good. And I loved being in the capital of Europe. I've always had a penchant for being in an international environment, multiple languages and stuff. Did my early career there too. So I was lucky enough to be in the first internet activities. I was actually the first person to be studying the internet as it was coming about then from a non-technical perspective, more from a media sociology perspective, and got me some press coverage and interviews and stuff, which was very lucky at the time. And then I started the very first website company in Belgium with some co-founders, and then ultimately moved to my first scale up that was called Telenet. And we launched the very first broadband internet service in Europe. And that was so early that the penetration of the old, like, narrowband internet, remember those modems that used to go like, that penetration was only 1% of households, and we were already launching broadband. So super, super early and very exciting, modems that would catch fire in the middle of a customer's home and all that stuff. So, very early days, but it grew 900% 3 years in a row. So that was my first real scale up experience. And we were all like people in our 20s running the whole show, because nobody over 30 dare touch that newfangled thing called the internet in those days, right? So then at the end of the 90s, I did my MBA in Switzerland and stayed in Switzerland afterwards to work at Bluewin, which was a company also slated for IPO, internet provider, the biggest one in Switzerland. And this was right at the dot-com burst. So they pulled back the IPO like a month before. And we had to do a gigantic turnaround of a company that was completely optimized for hype generation and, IPO hyping up towards like, okay, now let's make it profitable. Let's make it boring. Let's make it performant, right? So I still remember having to go through a list of 300 simultaneous projects that were going on for a company with 250 employees. So you can imagine, 10 of which were revenue generating, by the way, right? So that was the kind of days that we had to get rid of. So stayed there, did head of strategy, product management as well. And then at one of my own first startups in Switzerland in the whole management development area. Didn't work out, but I did learn a lot. And afterwards, I joined Physcape Topic Marks, which was a very early AI summarization startup that had been developed by my co-founder. And with that, I moved to Silicon Valley. I raised funding for it here in the Bay Area. We raised an A round. We won the Silicon Valley Founder Showcase, which was a great achievement that helped also attract further investors. And then afterwards, we very quickly folded it up into Tagged, which was an early social network that used the technology to kind of match people's interests in a graph database kind of environment. And then I joined my third scale up, which was Rocket Fuel, and that was a pioneer in putting AI to the use of advertising so that the right ads are placed in front of the right person at the right time. And that also grew from 10 to 1,000 people in like the 4 years I was there. They did an IPO. They had both the very high burst of the IPO and then also the typical unfortunate pattern of the share price then dropping ever further, because to some degree there's always promises that have been made that are hard to keep, right? And so again, learned a lot, both about what to do well and what not to do so well. And as part of Rocket Fuel, they were starting some business units, and I started to look at like, well, all those business units, where do people all get their knowledge from? And the CEO asked me, can you coach them internally? And I did. And I also landed on the scaling up methodology by Vern Harnish. And so I got myself certified in that methodology. And then very quickly, I started getting demands from outside the company, like, can you coach us as well? And so ultimately, I decided to make that my full-time job, which is about 10 years ago now, actually. And so I've been a coach for scaling startups ever since.
Great story. Vern, I know Vern personally. So we uh, I like Vern. I'm a huge methodology person, and I asked him a question. He couldn't give me the right answer, so I said, "Vern, you are a little bit outdated. You better get." you know, but his scaling up is definitely one way. So, um, however, you did not answer my question.
The first question, right? I forgot about it.
What is it that you can remember that resembles what you do today? First thing you remember as a kid.
I think it was always like about managing certain things, like whether it was organizing toys or organizing people in like groups for a game or something like that, or even setting a schedule for like a club, very simple with like, sketch paper and colored markers, but in a way, I've always been a manager and a leader, I guess, for even simple situations.
So were you one of those kids that, you would put like four, five, six, seven kids in a room, and then one of them would always step up and start telling the others what to do? Were you always one of those?
I was actually in those days, I was more than number two. I would see one person step up and then they would be like, trying to boss people around as I would see it. And then I would be the one stepping up and saying, you know what, but if we do it this way, then it's more efficient.
So you were kind of hidden number one.
In a way, yes. And I stuck with that for a while. Like I even remember in my college days, I was in a student, kind of like a fraternity in Belgium. And I was always like the number two in like the board of that fraternity. So somebody else would be the one that was like front and center as the chair or the whatever it was called, praeses. I think we used the Latin term, right? And that didn't appeal to me so much, but the one who was holding the strings in the back, that was the position that appealed to me.
Why do you think that was?
I don't know. I think it's to do with at that time I probably thought of the one in the front as a little bit more of a superficial role, maybe not quite, maybe more of a, let's call it more of a salesy kind of role, which did not appeal to me at the time. I have learned a lot more sales over the years, I'm glad to say, and I don't know if there was, or maybe also a confidence issue. I've definitely learned some more confidence over the years as well.
Yeah, fear, right? When you are in the front.
Maybe at that time, yes, but I definitely have learned a lot more public speaking in the meanwhile, and I do not have that fear anymore. I mean, put me in front of an audience anytime, I love it.
So, but that's my point. If you've developed that discomfort for being right in the forefront of everything, then you're compensating for that discomfort that lasted. Do you think that is something that kind of develops certain way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm actually a huge believer in that people can develop themselves and can get stronger at certain things that they may be lacking at. And partially that is the kind of pact with the devil that we close with the founders when we coach them. I'll tell you, Nick, that the real reason I started this coaching business was because I've seen so many founders be ousted by their investors, be put under pressure, unreasonable pressure, never been given a chance after a while to actually turn around their own company. And then even when they do get replaced, almost invariably, the new person in charge will be even less successful, will quickly have to close shop or sell it off for like a really low amount, right? Much worse than the original founder typically would have done. So I typically do not believe in founders being replaced as CEOs. And so the pact with the devil, as I said, is like, I can help founders stay in charge for as long as they want. But the corollary is, of course, they need to commit to changing and learning to change to what the business needs from them at that time. What I cannot do is keep them in charge while they stay the same and refusing to change.
Well, that would be insanity, right? So,
Well, insanity is, of course, not a characteristic we would not associate with founders in general, but
well, yeah, it's some crazy approach.
we all have to be crazy to some degree, especially in the startup world, right? So,
So, but going back to you though, were you the only kid in the family? Did you have siblings?
I do have siblings. I have a sister and a brother. I'm the eldest, and then my sister is about 1.5 years younger. My brother's about 3.5 years younger than I am.
And are they also in business, doing similar things you're doing?
They are in different kinds of business. So my sister is an HR consultant. She does outplacement consultants, typically temporary positions as a VP of HR, and she actually very much focuses on government institutions and law enforcement. So she was a part of the selection commission for the new police commissioner for Rotterdam, for example. So that's like her gig. And my brother is a veterinary surgeon. And so he's had his own practice for many years, but in the meanwhile, he's completely specialized in orthopedic surgery for pets. And so he does not actually do first line anymore. He just gets the referrals from the other vets for the more complex operations and surgeries.
And in your family, your parents, were they in business?
They were also in business, yes, and I do think that there's definitely something that you learn in growing up in a business versus like both of your parents being civil servants, for example, right? So we had a wholesaler for anything to do with bars and restaurants. That was the family business, and so the company would distribute beer, wines, sodas, but in the 80s we even started with frozen goods like fries and ice creams and all that stuff. And so yeah, it was a logistics business. And what I definitely learned in my teenage years is when somebody needed something on the weekend, then no matter come hell or high water, we would get it to the customer, and even though we would curse a lot.
Oh, yeah.
But you definitely learned how important it was to keep customers happy.
So, would you say you learned a lot of the leadership skills from your dad?
Interestingly, my dad never really wanted to run that family business, but he was the only son in the family. So I guess in that generation, he really didn't have a choice. And but his passion was always classical music. So he was playing the organ in the church from the age of 16 and did that until he was, I think, 76. He still does it every now and then. But after he got his medal from the Pope, he was like, okay, it's fine. And if it had been up to him, he would not have gone to trade school. He would have gone to conservatory to become a conductor. And so, of course, that was not an option at the time. So, but I've always been very proud of him. Like as soon as he retired, the very first thing he did was to register for conservatory.
Oh my God.
And still get his conservatory diploma and a conductor diploma at the age of 65.
Wow. That's what you call growing mature is mandatory, but growing old is optional.
I will keep that in mind. Thank you. As more of my hair falls out.
So your dad was running the business, but he really did not want to be the one running the business, I hear.
Yes, and for many years, there was actually he and his cousin were running it together. So originally, the cousin had been trained to be taking over, and then my dad also joined. So they were running it together as kind of co-founders. And then that cousin passed away, and then my dad ran it by himself until it was folded up into the bigger Heineken organization. Yeah.
So do you think that his unwillingness to be wholeheartedly running the business kind of rubbed off on you in the early days?
I guess so. Like that could have been explaining why in the beginning I didn't necessarily want to be the front and center of the game, right? My mom, however, was much more of a power woman in her days. So even though she was always more like in secretarial and assistant functions, she would be running the shows in like whether it was the the little school board for the infants, or it would be like as a doctor's assistant, or it would be as she did the parish council for many years. And yeah, she was always basically running those. So I definitely also learned some leadership from her.
So were you closer to your dad or your mom?
I'd say equally close. I don't really think I was closer to either, but I probably resemble my mom's character more.
Okay. All right. So what I'm reading here is now you obviously being first of all a man, your dad, you kind of simulated what your dad was doing in terms of your approach, wanted to take the back seat, and then you turn around and showed your mom, look,
Maybe, right? I need to tell Amalia I'll be a little bit late for our next meeting. Sorry.
yeah. So anyway, that's great information. You don't get to talk about these things, but it's always nice to dig into it a little bit. So
is this your technique to make people cry?
well, I mean, you get to, we don't really look after ourselves very well. We don't think about it much. We're just constantly tied up in running the business.
No, of course. Yeah. I love the insight.
Yeah. So, Roland, tell us again one more time, give us the name of your podcast. How can people tune into it? And also share your contact information with us.
Yeah, of course. So the name of the podcast is Scaling Without Breaking. You find all information about it on scalingwithoutbreaking.com. And we are available on midstage.org. Which is where you find all the resources around scaling your company without breaking all the way through the mid stage.
Great. Thank you for sharing all the information.
Of course. Thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you.
The Scaling Without Breaking podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.